Yep, there you go.
Awesome. All right. It is a challenge sometimes to have so many things on your screen trying to figure out what you're supposed to do next.
Very much so.
Okay, so I got my screen shared. Okay, welcome back to Take Action, Building an Inclusive Tech Community. For those who have just joined us, this series is a partnership between SIM South Florida, ISACA Florida, Beach Tech, and Cafe Miami. I would like to thank our planning committee, which included Tamika McKay, Tina Honey, Sandra Paras, Jensen, and Eileen Alon. So thank you all for all your hard work to put this together. We would also like to thank our sponsors, Digital Colony and WITI, Women in Technology International. Digital Colony is one of the world's largest dedicated digital infrastructure investment firms with over $20 billion in assets under management. Launched in 2017 by Digital Bridge and Colony Capital, Digital Colony brings together Digital Bridge industry, operational, and investment expertise and Colony Capital's global operating platform and capital market access. Digital Colony is a leading investor, owner, and operator, enabling the next generation of mobile and internet connectivity through investments in mission-critical infrastructure around the globe. For more information, you can visit their website at digitalcolony.com. WITI, Women in Technology International, is committed to empowering innovators, inspiring future generations, and building inclusive cultures worldwide. WITI is redefining the way women and men collaborate to drive innovation and business growth, and is helping corporate partners create and foster gender-inclusive cultures. A leading authority of women in technology and business, WITI has been advocating and recognizing women's contributions in the industry for more than 30 years. The organization delivers leading-edge programs and platforms for individuals and companies designed to empower professionals, boost competitiveness, and cultivate partnerships globally. To learn more, visit their website at witi.com. That's WITI.com. Tomorrow afternoon, SIM National has the SIM Foundation VIP networking reception to wrap up their 2020 Give Back Week. SIM South Florida is participating in the Give Back Week through this event and by collecting donations to the SIM Foundation that will benefit Venture Cafe Miami, Code Fever Miami, and IT Women. You can donate on simsfl.org. Go to the Donate tab and click the Donate button. So a little bit of housekeeping. Please remember to keep yourself on mute unless you are speaking, and be aware of what is visible on your video. If you need closed captions, click the CC button in Zoom to start the captions. We will be spotlighting the speaker and an ASL interpreter. Switch to speaker view to focus on the individual spotlighted. When a screen is being shared, switch to side-by-side view. If anyone who needs an interpreter is having difficulty, please send a message through chat so I can help you resolve it. So, our keynote speaker, Nancy Flores, is Executive Vice President, Chief Information Officer, and Chief Technology Officer, CTO for McKesson Corporation. I'm just realizing, I apologize, Nancy. I got into it and then realized that I have not stopped sharing my screen.
That's okay.
All right, why is it? There we go.
We can see it. We can see it now,
Yes.
Elizabeth.
All right. Thank you. All right, so our keynote speaker, Nancy Flores, is Executive Vice President, Chief Information Officer, and Chief Technology Officer for McKesson Corporation. In this role, Nancy is responsible for the company's technology initiatives and guides the overall direction for the company's healthcare technology products, data, and analytics. We met Nancy through SIM board member Jason Davis, who spoke of her time as CIO at Johnson Controls and how quickly Nancy was able to build the diverse team. We're so happy to have Nancy here to speak with us about her experience and share some of her advice for building a diverse team and creating a culture of inclusion. So thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us, and I will turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and happy to be here. And actually, I think it's great that there's a forum that's talking about this. I think one of the first steps is to talk openly about how we solve this. I call it imbalance or inequality, and I thank Jason for reaching out. I miss Jason greatly, but you know, with my experience at Johnson Controls, we drove a lot of change, and you know, with a lot of leadership engagement. I think my message is you can make a big difference. Sometimes it feels hard, but you know, if we're engaged, we can make a big difference. So I'll take you through a perspective. I'm actually going to take you through my life from a McKesson standpoint. I've done 2 stints in 2 other companies, but I think as I walked into McKesson, there's some great things that I think bring it all together. So I'll do that, and then we can go from there if that makes sense. So quickly, if we go to the next page. Elizabeth gave you kind of my background, so I'm not going to touch on that. There's 2 things on that I'll go through, but then who's McKesson? McKesson really, when I came in, what I was so excited about, it's a unique company where they're grounded on their mission, and it's something that when you talk about diversity and inclusion, understanding your mission of the company and how that relates to how you live and breathe, I think is really important. And then culture, and then what matters. And I think the last section, I hope I can bring to life what really makes a difference in terms of how you bring diversity and inclusion to life. So real quickly, background and experience. If you go to the next page, and the next page. No, I'm not going to go through this. Elizabeth went through. I think there's two key things when I thought about this is, you know, what gives me any street cred to even talk about this. Many of us have been in the technology field for years. And when you look at the success of a technologist, you're typically in a function. You're typically having to coordinate across many different businesses, many different business units, many different cultures. And when you think about diversity and inclusion, we are one of the leaders and one of the groups that bring people together, whether it's gender, whether it's ethnicity, but many times in a corporate culture, it's different cultures, different departments, different functions that all think differently. But when you think about what matters around diversity and inclusion, especially in an inclusive environment, we actually are up against that every day. And many of us, we may not realize it, we have the skills to bring people together and to create a culture of inclusion. And we do that every day in order to deliver technology and create that. And I just, the only thing I want to point out is my last bullet point. Do the hard stuff, commit, help others, and be nice. What has gone on in this world today, nobody supports that behavior. And I think what's hard is people feel paralyzed. I think, to me, it's all about having the courage to be engaged and be awake. And so that's one of the most important pieces here is it's beyond a PowerPoint, it's beyond a mission, It's really, you know, the commitment to make a change. So real quick, next page. I'll talk a little bit about McKesson. I can talk a little bit about what's different from this culture compared to my other experiences at 2 other companies, at Johnson Controls and at Abbott. And I think it's I did not realize how important that was and how fundamental it is to shaping the culture of how you work every day. So if you go to the next page, our mission is really to improve the care in every setting, one product, one partner, and one patient at a time. And if you go into the next page, this is really, to me, fundamental is when we look at how we operate, our patients are at the center. But when you look at all of the businesses we're in across the healthcare space, you know, you often wonder, how are we successful in understanding the customer? The more our workforce represents and reflects the communities that we serve, the better we are and the more successful we are in terms of understanding what our patients need and understanding what our customer needs. We play in many different areas of the healthcare space. We typically call ourselves the monkey in the middle because we're delivering PPE. We're very proud to be part of the vaccine distribution for COVID. And we do a number of services for our pharma manufacturing. So we touch people of all walks of life, all socioeconomic backgrounds, all communities. and very, very different types of diseases. And so as we think about D&I, the question we ask is, how do we best understand our customer and our patients? Well, it's to reflect the community that we work in. And that's a really diverse and inclusive culture. If you go to the next page, many of us, though, have employees. The one thing I want to call out here is we have 80,000 employees. The majority of our employees are distribution workers. We are right in the middle of managing COVID for the country. If one of those individuals were to get sick, if one of those individuals were to have family dynamics or anxiety or anything like that, that impacts what we do to our patients. So our human capital is really important. And I think that's one of the most important observations I have is when you have a company and culture that understands that every employee is critical to the success of that company, it really makes you think differently about how do you make them successful. If you go to the next page, when you talk about how do we make them successful, culture really matters. And I think this is where, we talk about diversity and inclusion around the systems and the processes we put in place. And you talk about a mission, and we've heard a number of companies and statements that are, making commitments to help drive diversity, inclusion, and equality for all. But what really matters is what goes beyond those missions, what goes beyond those statements, and what goes beyond those PowerPoint presentations. It's actually what's happening in how people show up to work every day. So if you go to the next page, we really, when we started to reflect on diversity and inclusion, our first question was, well, what are we doing? We're not perfect, but are there foundational things that really make a difference? And when we look at some of what we do, we already have a number of things around employee resource groups. When the George Floyd situation happened, we had a foundational set of communities that came together where employees felt comfortable to talk about certain things. And actually, what happened out of that was we had these groups and places where these employees felt comfortable to talk about it. And they were able to come back to our executive management and our CEO and actually give a perspective that we were able to listen to. And that's been a fundamental piece of how we've actually gone forward and started to reshape how we work in terms of diversity and inclusion. If you go to the next page, this is really fundamental, and this is where I talk about culture and behaviors. Working for 3 different companies in an executive role, I don't think I appreciated the importance of culture and behaviors. And we've had these behaviors in place for over 20 years. But when you think about how every individual wants to be valued, heard, and respected, our I care behaviors around integrity, customer first, accountability, respect, and excellence are really fundamental in assuring we talk about diversity and inclusion in the right way. So the things that our cultures give us is around how we work. It really drills down to what does it mean to be inclusive. So when you talk about our behavior of respect and you talk about that in light of diversity and inclusion, whether it's people of color, gender, having a different socioeconomic background, having coming from a different set of schools, those are all differences that need to be recognized in order to create an inclusive environment. Some of how we talk about this is we believe each and every employee owns it. So it's not just a top-down view. It's really important that every employee feels that they own those behaviors and they can talk upward and downward around diversity and inclusion. And it's leading, I think this to me is one of the other most important things. It's leading by behaviors, not by policies. I've worked in 3 other environments. One of those environments had policy around diversity and inclusion, and the intent was good, the mission was good, but it became more of a structure versus holding everybody accountable to behave in a way that everybody mattered. And those are small nuances, but when you do the pulse check of how does somebody feel, that's the pulse check, is when an employee feels like they're heard and they're valued. That really is what makes the difference. Going to the next page, we also look at diversity and inclusion, not just about people of color or gender. It's also about creating an environment where every employee can come in and feel healthy and most optimal in terms of how they work. So we talk about diversity and inclusion. We talk about the health of the employee. And with COVID, a big discussion point about creating an inclusive environment is also being sensitive to the fact that everybody's home life is different right now. And so even when we talk about return to work, it's not necessarily about setting a standard at work. It's about understanding and having compassion that we have some families where they have 3 children at home and they have to homeschool. So you have 2 parents that have to split their shifts in terms of when they can be available to work or not. You have families where they live in a smaller, we were originally based out of San Francisco, so we actually have a large population where many employees don't have the physical space to actually manage working from home for 2 people and kids going in. So we try to be very sensitive of that, and we always ask ourselves is, how do we get the work done? Our belief is if every employee comes to work feeling like they can balance their personal life and their family life, that makes the employee even better. So we try to build a sentiment and compassion around everybody shows up to work, but everybody shows up to work and they have different needs that they have to address in order to be the best they can at work. If you go to the next page, and I think this is another unique important thing about how we feel, the communities we serve, it's important for us to recognize the differences in the communities we serve. We have an oncology managed care platform. Approximately 30% of all cancer patients go through our service. And if you're familiar with cancer, I'm sure many of you know a loved one or have had a family member go through cancer treatment. You know that not all cancer is created equal, and every treatment is special and they have to be specialized and adapt. One of the things we look at is that personalization. And when a patient is personalized, whether it's, we're running real world evidence clinical trials, understanding what services they need is really important. And we see the socioeconomic impact, the fact that the majority of oncology research is done up to date, with mostly white males. Now, there's a big push to really get that balance. So it really becomes front and center when we look at our patient back in terms of the communities. Representing them in a diverse and inclusive way becomes a fundamental part of how we become successful. And when you sit in your companies, I would ask yourself, when you look at the customer base that you serve, what does that look like, and how does understanding each of those populations really make a difference in terms of how you should work and think? So that's some background. What I want to do next is really, we can go to the next page and we'll skip that. And let's go to what matters, because I think that's really, every company has principles and cultures and objectives. I would actually challenge each of you to go back and really focus on how true is leadership in terms of driving that culture and holding yourselves accountable for that behavior. I will tell you from the CEO down, assuming good intent, celebrating the differences. Those are things we are talking about more and more and how we make people comfortable. My personal experience, I've had situations in my past where you come in an executive, there's a certain style, a certain culture of how you work and behave and communicate. Coming to McKesson, my CEO specifically set no expectations on how we communicate. So when we go to board meetings or when we talk at staff, he accepts the differences of how we report out our performances, things in our areas, which is a very different concept than typical companies. So that's just one nuance of making each employee feel comfortable. But when you go into what matters to the next page, I talked about culture and behaviors, employee engagement. We are a big fan of the pulse. Understanding the pulse of employees. So we actually do a lot of surveys. We actually have 80+% compliance when we ask our employees how they feel and what they think. And the reason for that is every time we take a pulse survey, we have a town hall and our CEO from the top down reports out what we heard and the action we're going to take. Accountability and rewards, I won't touch a lot about the systems that need to be in place, but one of the most important things is being very clear around the performance expectations of what you expect of every employee. That becomes really important when you want to drive diversity and inclusion from a development standpoint. And then education and socialization. Talk about that. A lot of people need the support on how to talk about this. A lot of what we're finding is, there's a lot of nobody's intentionally doing this for negative reasons, but I think it just, from a society standpoint, it isn't easy to talk about. So we are trying to give permission that it's okay to talk about it, it's okay to socialize it. And that's really important from a people standpoint, so people feel comfortable about talking about it. If you go to the next page, these are some things we're starting to talk about as a leadership in terms of really explicitly calling out what we expect. And what we expect is embracing you as you are. You know, leaders are responsible for making sure everybody on their staff, everybody in their organization feels visible, heard, and understood. And I think the one most important piece we talk about is, and that's acknowledged. You know, when you look at feeling comfortable that you're able to come to work and you're feeling heard and understood, many times that's not from the individual's perspective, that's from the perspective of those around them saying, hey, you know what, that's a good point, I heard you, or thank you for that contribution. The other piece is looking at your landscape and being curious about the differences or actively listening. That's everything. When we were at Johnson Controls, what I loved, and this happened before my time, we had a large population of an Indian culture, and to bring that culture into our community, we started celebrating Diwali every year, and it was something that the team came back and wanted to do, to celebrate and bring together an education of different cultures. When I left the last year, they had over 300 people that came to the Diwali celebration, and it was beyond IT. It became an entire site thing. But what it did was it brought people together. It brought an understanding of different cultures, and there were so many interactions around curiosity, and that where everybody learned after the fact. That can be done not just for cultures, that can be done from different schools. Or how many of you have sat there and, you know, you have half the population and they're talking about a football season, and the other half really don't care, you know? So those are some of the nuances in terms of bringing everybody into the fold about an equal culture. And I think it's really promoting the diversity of our individual experiences. We talk about this a lot because you can look the same as somebody in your room, but sometimes you come from a completely different experience. I did not go to an Ivy League college. I actually did not, you know, I went to a middle of the road college. I had a scholarship. I had to work through college. That's a very different experience than somebody who went to an Ivy League college, didn't have to work, you know, spent their summers having fun. And that's not good or bad. It's just a different experience in terms of how you show up. And those are really good experiences, because sometimes bringing those two together can give a really good perspective. If you go to the next page, performance drives opportunity. So one of the things we talk about is, how do we make sure we have the right systems and processes in place, whether it's recruitment or performance management. The one thing we do talk about is to focus less on the mandatory experience or degree that they have, but really intentionally looking at performance. And if performance is good, how do we actually develop that individual? That individual may not have the experience, but the question is, how might we give them that experience if they have the fundamental performance in place? The other piece I will tell you is we are taking a strong look at how we recruit. Some of the focus of having a diverse slate isn't enough. And this is where Jason, if you speak to Jason, he will tell you, having a diverse slate was not enough for me to say that was going to make a difference in changing the culture. Having a population we at Johnson Controls, we had about 100 open headcount. I did not want to make it a quota, but what I said is, our goal is that after we hire these 100 people, 50% will be diverse. And we drove that from, we were in the lower 20% were female in terms of our stats, in terms of our profile. And so I knew we could do better, but it wasn't about the numbers. It was about changing the behavior. And actually, I was so proud of the leadership team, because at first it was, well, we can't do it. Yes, we can. But the discussion changed around, okay, how might we recruit differently? Do we have to recruit at different places? And when we actually interviewed, nuances around, okay, you brought a female candidate in, how many of your interviewees were females? When you talked about the candidates, did you talk about if we were to pick somebody that maybe is different from what we've typically hired from in the past, how might we make that individual successful? Do we need somebody that's a buddy to help them integrate into the culture? Those are some really important nuances in terms of getting and attracting the talent and making a commitment to make sure they feel like they can be successful. If you go to the next page. This is a really important one. Act with courage and enforce zero tolerance. We debated a lot around what do we have to change. So many companies have cultures, many companies have behaviors, many companies have all been in about diversity and inclusion, but we talk about what really has to change to commit to making that change. And we talk about two things: is the courage to stand up and speak up, not just for yourself, but for your peer that hasn't been heard, or for something you see isn't wrong. And I think each of you, including myself, can reflect back and identify situations where, boy, if I stood up, I wonder if that would have made that situation better or more positive. And this is where I say doing the hard work. I'm constantly challenging my group in terms of, we need to hire people and we need to hire them fast. I have openings and I have to deliver. And sometimes you want to just go with what you're comfortable with. It's harder work to push to get the right balance or the right mix or the right talent. It's not always easy, but it's really committing to do that hard work. So having the courage to stand up and having the courage to allow individuals below you that can hold your leadership accountable. And that I have a personal experience in the last 2 weeks. We had a town hall. I have an open door policy. And this individual had been at the company for 8 years, had the courage to call me. He was an African-American individual, had been at the company for 8 years and said, you know what? I have been wanting to be promoted for years. I have never had that opportunity. Every time I've asked for that opportunity, they've told me no. And then they've posted a position and have done a contract for hire. So we actually went back and did a review, but we openly made it right. And we openly have gone back and done a systemic review to say, here's how we need to go forward. And the goal was to make it better for people going forward. That individual took a huge risk to call me up and tell me his story. And my commitment back to him was that we were going to do what we needed to do to make it right, and celebrate and positively reinforce that, to speak up, to say something helped us as leaders fix something that we just didn't see. So that's an example of being courageous. And then enforcing zero tolerance. A lot of what we're talking about is how do we do the right thing? There's always a balance with doing the right thing in formal structure. So we try to lead with what's the right thing to do. And then there's the HR and the legal processes we have to follow. But a lot of it is that. And then when there's zero tolerance, this is where it gets to performance management processes are important. But when there's zero tolerance, it's not always, well, they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what they were saying. Zero tolerance is zero tolerance. And that's a really important piece, is to make sure that we can hold ourselves accountable, especially leadership. We can't look the other way, or that changes the culture. So this, to me, this slide is probably the most important slide, because many companies have a lot of things in place, but it's really how do you actually get the engagement of leadership to change the culture, that it's okay to speak up. It's okay to say, hey, I don't think something's wrong. Or it's okay when something is wrong, that we take action. And we don't necessarily lead by an administrative process. We lead by what's the right thing to do. When you go to the next page, and this is kind of where, at the end of the day, when you put all this stuff, what does it feel like? And we talk about, if we do this right, every employee, I call it a segment of one, every employee should be able to get up, feel like they want to come to work, and they're heard, they're valued, and they're respected. I'm sure many of you have come into work and there have been in situations where you're in a meeting and you try to say something and everyone just keeps talking, or you say something and they didn't quite understand you. how do you as an individual, when you walk in those environments, encourage, that collaboration, encourage that environment where everybody can come in and have a point of view. Opportunities to progress and develop skills and advance are earned through performance. This is where we're working pretty hard to be clear about what it takes to get to the next level and how do we help them. What we're learning is that when we formalize it, both the employee and the leader have much more clarity on helping them advance. That becomes really important because oftentimes, depending on where somebody comes from, it might be very clear on how to get to the next level. It's not always clear what development they need. So that's a really important one. And then the last one is every employee must have the courage to speak up and stand up, not just for themselves, but for others when they see inequality. So those are some of the things we talk about. We really are trying to get past it. It's not about, we have a mission, we have a culture, but how do we actually put into action? So the employee 7 levels below, when they're sitting at the table having lunch, and they sit there and they're proud to work for a company where they can come in, they can contribute, they have a sense of belonging, and then they can go home and be proud of where they work and know that it's an environment they want to be in for a long time. And then the last page is just really, when you ask yourself, what do you do? And when you reflect, these are some questions to ask yourself, how do you make it work? For me, it's every individual feeling like they've got to take action. That's going to make a difference. And it's not the big stuff. It's not the big audacious goals. It's actually the stuff you do every day, just so everybody feels equal. So that's a perspective, a point of view around diversity and inclusion. I think the one thing I would tell you, being on the side of experiencing lack of diversity and inclusion, being in a position where my goal is to positively impact, it really is about the day-to-day actions you take as an individual to make the environment around you better. This is actually, you hear sometimes it can't be a grassroots effort, it's got to be top down. The leadership can set the tone, but something like this requires every individual to commit to making their environment better. So that's kind of my story. That's what I have to share. Elizabeth, I'll hand it back to you. I'm happy to take questions or be part of a broader discussion. We can debate things, however you'd like to go.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy. We actually do have some questions coming in via chat. So I'm going to ask you the first one from Mark McGuire. His question is, what are the different ways you measure the effort and impact of creating diversity within the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question because there is the debate about it's not about the number. And the way we look at it, and this is the way I look at it, is I'm trying to shift behavior of every time you post a position. We'll use posting as one. Every time you post a position is when somebody may be looking at, you need a diverse slate. To me, it is taking that focus off the individual headcount and being much more thoughtful around planning your headcount for the year, knowing how many total headcount you're going to have, and putting in place an active recruiting strategy around where you're going to go and where you're going to go to recruit a diverse slate. Studies have shown many companies have goals of, if we get one person of color on the diverse slate and one gender, one female on the diverse slate, that should help us. But studies show that 70% of the time it's ineffective. So what we're trying to do is, how do we build the slate? We are a Fortune 8 company. I post a position, we get 300 applicants. Nobody can tell me that I can't get a strong, diverse candidate slate that are highly qualified people. So it's changing the discussion there and holding my team accountable for the behavior and thinking through how do we optimize that diversity there. And then it plays itself out. And then ultimately you have the flexibility that the best candidate plays out, whether it's a person of color or not. And then on the back end, we track the metrics after the fact. But it's working so far where but it is a lot of work on the front end to get people to think and behave differently. You got to kind of use a little elbow grease. And when, I'll get exceptions asked about, well, we tried, we have a diverse slate, but I've got this candidate over here and I don't have any. Okay, well, let's go sit down with the recruiting team and let's go review that. Oh, okay. They only reviewed 50 of the applicants. You have 200 more applicants. Can we go back and do that? So it's a little bit of elbow grease. And then we measure it on the back end. So we don't use the number to drive the behavior. We use the number to look at our performance, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I was pausing because there's the perennial, am I still on mute? And then if you don't check, you are on mute.
You're doing great. I don't know that I could host something virtually.
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a series. So I'm sure by the time the second or third one comes around, I will be much better at hosting these. So I do have a question. Actually, it became two questions from Raul Takar. And he can get mad at me later if I pronounced his name incorrectly, since we've known each other for a long time. The question is, can you please talk about, if possible by example, the problems that you have faced as you have recommended a specific D&I initiative and the response began with a no?
A no. I don't know that I have specifically said, hey, we must do this. And no, I will. Two experiences. This is at Johnson Controls. We looked at how diverse we were. It's an engineering company based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So Midwest, not a lot of diversity, especially in engineering. And we took a goal, the IT group took a goal, but I went to our CEO and said, this should be a goal for everyone. Well, we talked about it, but it didn't really follow through. But my attitude was game on. We're going to show them how to do this. And actually, I was so proud of the team because we did. That's one example where, oftentimes to me, it's doing the right thing. Maybe they said no, but how can you influence that? And to be very honest with you, if you have certain resistance, sometimes no is out of just ignorance and education. And so after we did that, we actually won an award I won an award on behalf of the team. And our CEO realized how important it was. And that changed how we talked about it at staff. But you also run in situations where management's not bought in. So I think that's a really important realization to understand is, are they truly committed to D&I or not? That would be the experience I would share. Don't give up, you can make a world of difference for one individual. So maybe they say no, but can you do something different?
Great. So I am going to ask Raul to ask his next question himself.
Oh, okay.
Only because I'm reading it and I think he would do a much better job explaining what his question is.
Oh, thank you, Liz. Hello, Nancy. And Liz, you did not destroy my name that much. But it's a few years of practice. So when you are increasing the diversity in your organization, but from what it was at a certain moment in time to what it is at a certain moment in time across several years, does McKesson or your past companies, are they able to track the change in quality of the company's performance relative to the change in diversity? We always talk about diversity as improving us, but do we measure it? Is there a measure?
Yeah, there are studies. I know there are studies that measure it. I will tell you, I'll give my experience. I just feel, and I'll go back to, Johnson Controls. I think as we brought in a different mix of talent, it's more anecdotal. I felt we had richer discussions and we were a global company. So, having a female from Singapore join the executive team who was a long-standing person in the company that was just key talent, and we brought her to the table, completely changed the discussion of how we thought about, some of our strategies. I will tell you here at McKesson, we moved from San Francisco to Las Colinas. So I've had the opportunity to rebuild 4 key roles on my staff. My CISO, who's African-American, he's one of the top CISOs in the country. My CTO, who just came from AT&T, Hispanic. She was just recognized as one of high-tech's 100 most influential global leaders. Overnight, these individuals have made a positive impact in the performance of my area. Do we track it? I think we're pretty immature on that. I don't know if I know there's studies out there that track it, but I think as a company, we haven't looked at it. Now, what we're looking at is our internal metrics where we look at recruitment and retention and sustainment. That's what we're starting to look at is, and it's not something I probably can speak to, but HR is paying a lot of attention in terms of employee relations, retention, sustainability. I have walked in an organization where one of my sites, we do employee satisfaction scores. One of my sites is very low. That site doesn't have as much of a diverse population. That site has had gender challenges from an employee relations standpoint. So those are just anecdotal things, Rahul, that I think but no, we don't track it. I don't know if any other companies do, but it is a good point. I believe diversity of thought is so important and just brings so much creativity in what you do.
Thank you. Yes, truly, absolutely.
It would be boring if we all thought the same.
I know. And it's funny, when you mentioned about Diwali, it's really, of course, personal to me. I'm of Indian origin.
Diwali?
Yes, we do celebrate it. Even here, we bring in some fireworks and sometimes go to West Virginia to get into trouble. But, I still remember Liz in university being curious about Diwali in the Indian Student Association, and her family hosting Indian folks to introduce us to what real cowboys were. I still remember this. That was the memory that struck me when you talked about Diwali at work.
You can come to Texas and we can have real cowboys. So, yeah, I will tell you my experience at Abbott, my experience at Johnson Controls. McKesson is much more US, Canada, Europe based. But if you're at a global company, there is an inherent opportunity to bring different cultures. And I remember, when people would travel to staff or our meetings, there was just this inherent culture. And if you have that curiosity as a team, where they come in and they bring their culture into that forum, going to Singapore and celebrating Chinese New Year's, going to Europe and, my Russian leader who headed some of our finance stuff, bringing, Russian teas. All of that creates an environment where people become curious or more accepting of differences. Those might not be strategy or formal business capabilities, but to me, those are some of those informal things that really bring a team together emotionally and connected wise. That creates that inclusive, because at the end of the day, we're humans. We all need to be liked and be part of something. I think those are really important things that kind of take your guard down and you're not threatened by something that you're not familiar with. So I think if you're at a global company, there's so many opportunities to naturally do this if you pay attention to it.
Yep. Thank you so much. We do have one more question from Ed Bryant. Can you talk about how McKesson engages with your customers and suppliers through a D&I lens?
We actually do a couple things, and we're talking about it more from a social impact. So we have a number of distribution centers, a number of healthcare systems. So we have programs in place around how we have a foundation that will contribute to certain communities, whether it's for healthcare or for services. that will address that from a D&I standpoint. We do community walks around our cancer cause network. Tonight we're actually doing something for this month. It's leukemia and lymphoma, but we always have something in the community where we bring that together. From a patient standpoint, a lot of what we're talking about is on the oncology space is, real world evidence, and how do we use real world evidence? We have a number of patients that come through our practice. And how do we use that population pool to actually drive better outcomes? So that's a big actually strategy for us in terms of recognizing that a lot of clinical trials, maybe you read about it all the time, but we have a source where we're managing a big population of cancer patients. That how do we use that to drive real world evidence for better outcomes of all different people of color and diversity and things like that. So I hope that answered the question.
Yes, I think so. So I think we have a couple more minutes. I don't know if anyone else has a question.
If anybody's thinking, I think the one thing I would tell from a personal, just a personal experience, I lived in the Midwest for 24 years. I was in Chicago when they had the second set of riots. And then about a few weeks later, they had the riots in Kenosha. That was 8 blocks from where my children grew up. And it just made me so angry of where we've gotten to. And when you look at those pieces, I think the one thing, if everybody is sitting here asking, what can I do? The one thing I did when I got back to Dallas, they had a memorial, and it was called Say Their Name. And it was a memorial of I think 100 African-American people that had been killed through gun violence. So I wanted to go. I was very compelled to go. And when I got there, I was so disappointed, and here's why. I was one of the few non-Black people there. So there was just a line of African-Americans. And if we want to change diversity, if we want to be more accepting, all of us need to make a commitment to learn about different cultures and different walks of life. And how many of us have friends and colleagues? I am a believer that 95% of us are diverse and inclusive, and that's how we live. But how many of us think about those things to support our friend or our neighbor or our kids' friends, in terms of driving this change? That was my personal commitment, is I want to do more in understanding. I'm Hispanic. I'm very engaged in the Hispanic community, but I wasn't as engaged in understanding the Black community. And I live in Dallas. And so how can I learn and walk in their shoes a little bit to have a little more compassion about what they need, or how I can help? When you think about women, we got the right to vote, but you know what? You know who voted for us? It wasn't us, because we couldn't vote. It was the men who voted for us, who voted on our behalf to have the right to vote. So how do we start to learn and understand different viewpoints, different cultures, different genders, and help create an environment that's more inclusive from our standpoint? Because we're the ones that can do it. So.
Yes, thank you for that. And that's one of the reasons why, we wanted to do this event, is because, it can't be, I think I said in the last session, it's not a problem that, the people who kind of the victim of the problem, it's not a problem they can solve. It has to be a problem that we're all solving together. And I think, there's, number of people, famous people have said it. I'm going to paraphrase it, when one group of people is experiencing inequality, it is going to affect all of us.
Yes, yeah. And I believe technology leaders have traditionally served in roles where they've had to bring people together. They've had to work through adversity, whether it's, the change management of implementing a system. I believe this is a great leadership group that can actually drive the change, because you're in a position where you see differences across the company. And when you're in a leadership position, I think we have a community where we can bring all of that in. So I think it's a great leadership. It's a great topic for this group. And I hope you guys have a good session. But thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me share a perspective. And thank you, Jason. It's always good to see Jason.
Yes. Definitely. Thank you, Jason, for doing the introductions. Nancy, thank you so much for your time this evening and for sharing your perspective. It has really been enlightening. And as we keep saying, it's all about actionable advice. I think you've given us a lot of advice that we can go away and take action on. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you guys have a good session.
Right, thank you. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back at 6 o'clock. The Zoom will stay on since closed captions is working perfectly now. But feel free to turn off your camera, take a break, walk around, get some water, and we'll be back at 6. Thank you so much.
Elizabeth. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, Elizabeth, so I'm just going to go use the bathroom and stuff and get up for once, and then I will be ready for the next one.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thanks.